so let's get started on 3.3. This is the last section of chapter 3. First, let's do a brief recap. We've talked about photosynthesis. We've talked about cellular respiration. We've talked about food chains and food webs, and then, of course, energy pyramids. Today, let's talk about what nutrients is so that we understand how it's cycled through to get to other organisms, like in a food chain or a food web. So, first, what are the nutrients that cycle through the entire food web, right? All the different food chains within a food web. So gases, oxygen, nitrates, carbon dioxide, they're either going to be produced by organisms or they're going to be in the atmosphere. Now we know carbon dioxide can come from factories releasing, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but it can also come from burning wood. Again, smoke being released into the atmosphere. It can also come from organisms doing photosynthesis, so trees processing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. So we know that carbon dioxide can be released through many different forms, right? We release carbon dioxide. Oxygen is going to also be used and released. Nitrogen is a little bit different. So nitrogen gas actually cannot be taken in by like us and fish, but instead they're actually going to go in through the roots of plants, and then decomposers are going to take that nitrogen gas and convert it into nitrates and then eventually ammonia. So this is nitrogen fixing bacteria. We'll talk about that in a little bit here, but moving on to the next one, which is magnesium. Now we have ions, magnesium, carbonate, phosphate, nitrate. These are going to go through food chains and food webs because of runoff and upwelling. So upwelling, remember, that's from the bottom of the ocean upward. And then, of course, runoff is water carrying over land. So water carrying fertilizers and other nutrients from the land. What are organic compounds? Well, in order for life to exist, there has to be these organic compounds, which is carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. They're going to pass directly through the food chain because of the things that we eat and also the things that we are absorbing. Now, why do we need biological molecules like carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids? Well, first, we need carbohydrates because it makes glucose. So carbohydrates are going to be made up of glucose, which is a simple sugar, and glucose is released by plants. Plants do the process of photosynthesis like we've already talked about, and they release glucose, which is important for us as a simple sugar, and for plants, we see it in their cell walls. So also when we eat plants, we're gaining that glucose. So we use it for, of course, quick energy, but also plants need it for their cell wall. So what are the biological molecules? They are going to be the big molecules, the large molecules that we find. The elements that make up carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And as always, you should always have an example of what glucose looks like. So then we have lipids, right? So lipids are going to be made up of fatty acid and glycerol. They make up cell membranes. Now, elements that make up lipids are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And also we should know a simple structure of what lipids look like. Then we have proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. We need proteins in order for our cells to function. So proteins are really important for cellular function. Now, when we think about like cellular function, we're talking about what our cells do. So that means when we think about a protein, all of life needs proteins. So we do need to understand a simple structure of what a protein looks like. Of course, just know simple structures. You don't need to know anything in too much detail, but if you do see glucose or fatty acids or the structure of a protein, you should really be able to talk about what those molecules are. Now, why do we need the elements that make up the different macromolecules or biological molecules? Well, the first thing is nitrogen. Nitrogen is used in proteins, so they're used to make proteins, but why are they needed? They're needed for DNA, and it's also going to be needed for chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a pigment that allows plants to do photosynthesis. Then we have carbon. Carbon is used to make every single organic compound. So all of the biological molecules have carbon. Magnesium is also used to make chlorophyll. So that's really important for plants because of photosynthesis. Then calcium is important because, again, it's used to make bones and shells and then the coral skeletons as well. Phosphorus is going to be used also to make DNA, but it's going to also be found in bones as well. So all of the elements that make up these biological molecules are used to make something. That ends our first section of 3.3. Go ahead, if you'd like this video, like it, subscribe, and as always, stay tuned for our next episode, 3.3 Part 2.